Sixth lesson on the third topic, the final lesson for this unit, looks at how the British and French changed their policy from appeasement to deterrence, and more particularly why they did it. The Nazi-Soviet Pact, a surprising agreement between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, the really ideological opposites, and eventually how the Second World War and why the Second World War started. So, following the complete invasion and annexation of all of Czechoslovakia in March of 1939, the British and the French realized that there was little they can do. Moreover, as we discussed last lesson, the invasion of Czechoslovakia marked a major shift in Hitler's foreign policy, from moving away from the idea of incorporating German speakers into a greater Germany. The invasion of Czechoslovakia proved that Hitler had global domination, or at least at the very least European domination and visions. And for the British and the French, this was an intolerable ambition, more or less, because of course it would shrink the influence of both Britain and France, but not only that, leave an aggressive, hostile, and incredibly wealthy Germany on their border, which would most certainly lead to the eventual invasion of those two countries, so they could no longer tolerate it. Everyone knew, and it was basically obvious, that Poland would be Hitler's next target. First and foremost, Hitler could, at least to some degree, legitimately claim areas of Poland were traditionally part of Germany. There were large parts of the new country of Poland created by the Versailles settlement, which Hitler hated, that had German speakers in it. For the biggest example would be West Prussia, the area that formed the majority of what's known as the Polish corridor, which separated East Prussia, which was still German, from the main bulk of German territory. Moreover, Danzig, located in the Polish corridor, was the city that the Poles wanted specifically in the Treaty of Versailles. The Poles argued that we need a port, and therefore they need the port of Danzig, the tremendously large port on the Polish corridor, which gives Poland access to the sea. Danzig, unfortunately for the Poles, and I suppose which strengthens Hitler's claims, was overwhelmingly populated by German-speaking and Germans. So the idea that Danzig was controlled by Poland was, of course, inherently problematic. So everybody knew that Hitler would try to address the issue of Poland sooner or later. Within minutes, really, of his annexation of Czechoslovakia, Hitler began demanding the return of the port of Danzig to Germany. And not only that, the establishment of German-controlled transport links across the Polish corridor. In other words, German highways, German rails that the Poles wouldn't have access to, but would allow direct connections to both Danzig and East Prussia from Prussia's, Germany's most eastern part of Prussia, directly. The thing about these demands is, had they happened before he invaded Czechoslovakia, they would have been considered relatively reasonable, all things considered. In fact, they were the nature of the claim was very similar to what he had claimed with the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. However, of course, as we know, the invasion of Czechoslovakia ended the policy of appeasement, and the Allies were no longer willing to hear what Hitler considered his reasonable demands for the return of German-speaking people into the Reich. And by the 31st of March 1939, the British and French see it fit to end basically any concept of working with Hitler and offer a guarantee of support to Poland. And that guarantee of support would be that Britain and France would declare war and give them support in terms of entering a war if Germany were to invade and attack Poland's sovereign territory. At the same time, as they were offering assurances to Poland, Britain and France very much realized geographically their ability to help the Poles is incredibly limited. Poland's completely isolated from Britain and France. They don't touch. In fact, to get to Poland, you would have to go through Germany. So therefore, any real guarantee to Poland was, mostly symbolic, because, of course, the British and the French would have almost an impossible time of getting to Poland. And if they were to go into war, that would effectively mean they would have to invade Germany from the west. To counter this problem, Britain and French diplomats, primarily British diplomats, started to consider and started to think of the idea of forming a grand alliance with Soviet Russia. In other words, because Russia borders Poland from the west, if they were able to form an alliance, Britain, France, and Russia, to support Poland, then the Russians could give support. Britain and France could ship their troops through Russia by taking the northern route across the top of Norway, Sweden, and Finland, landing at Archangel, and bringing their troops into Poland via the back door with a friendly ally of Russia. And this became, I suppose, the focus of efforts in the summer of 1939 to try and stop Germany from taking Poland, which everyone expected them to do. The concept then of the Grand Eastern Alliance develops. This alliance really needed quite a bit of persuasion. Of course, the Russians are deeply, deeply distrustful of the Allies, and the Grand Eastern Alliance is something that's only really softly considered. In fact, one of the things I don't mention in this PowerPoint, but it's important to note, is that one of the things that prevents the Russians from getting involved in an alliance, and don't forget, they are deeply distrustful themselves of Nazi Germany, is the fact that Britain and France don't appear to be taking it very seriously. Britain and France, for lots of reasons, don't want to get too close to Soviet Russia. So they start to toy with this idea of an alliance, but they don't take it seriously. And because they don't take it seriously, the Russians actually end up looking for other ways to ensure their national security against a German invasion. So by early August 1939, the talks between Britain and France effectively wear down. The Russians are insulted that the British aren't sending their top diplomats, that any decisions in the discussions that they have in Russia about an idea of an Eastern Alliance are going to have to go back to London. The Russians are not pleased with the way the British and French are handling this situation. And as a result, the idea of the Grand Eastern Alliance fails. And when this fails, Poland realizes that it has two Western allies, neither of whom is in a position to provide immediate assistance if Germany invaded, and they start to get extraordinarily worried, and with cause. By the end of August 1939, as war is looking more and more and more likely, Poland's fate is effectively sealed. The Germans, interestingly enough, seizing on the opportunity that the French and the British have failed to negotiate an alliance with Russia, actually, believe it or not, negotiate an alliance with Russia for themselves. The German foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, seen here signing the agreement of the Nazi-Soviet Pact in the picture, von Ribbentrop actually goes to Hitler in August 1939, and he says to him, Hitler hates the Soviet Union, by the way, he says, you know, if we capitalize on Russian self-interest and Russia's need to protection, we can, if we invade Poland, avoid, quote, a war on two fronts. We can avoid fighting in Russia in the east and then focus our energies on Britain and France in the west. The idea of a war on two fronts brings back the concept of World War I, where Germany had to fight on both its east and west, and we know that Germany lost that war. So Hitler and most of the German military leadership were keen to avoid fighting on both sides of its borders. So the idea that the Nazis and the Soviets would sign a non-aggression pact, a pact to not only fight each other, but divide up Poland. And it's important to note here that in the Nazi-Soviet Pact, Poland is effectively divided in two. The Nazis get the majority of it, but the Russians are able to meet their ambition of expanding their territory west. One of the things, and this is another aside on the failure of the Grand Alliance, is one of the conditions the Russians set for the Grand Alliance was the fact that the Allies, Britain and France, would have to allow Russia to seize Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia as a condition of signing this pact. Britain and France weren't going to hear that. But Hitler, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily care. He essentially says you can have your ambitions, you can even have some of Poland. Stalin, it's important to note, is not a good man, obviously, but at the same time is as expansionist as Hitler and wants to expand the borders of Soviet Russia. And he's willing to sign this pact with Germany to divide up Poland in two. Now, on its surface, of course, this seems like an incredibly unlikely event, and it does take the world by storm. You have two ideological opposites, fascism and communism. Hitler had always talked about hating the communists. He wrote in Mein Kampf at length about how communism should be destroyed and the need to seek Lebensraum, or living space, by taking it from the Soviet Russia. Not only that, Stalin was aware of these intentions and expected an invasion at some point, and it's indeed during his third-year plan, launched in 1937, he had been preparing for a German invasion through a massive armaments program to protect and increase the size of the Soviet army. On the other hand, however, although it caught people by surprise, if you think about it, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. Hitler, of course, wants to ensure that if he invaded Poland, he wouldn't be faced with having to fight Britain and France in the west and the Russians on the east. Stalin also hoped that an Anglo-French-German war would last for years and years and years, and this war would buy him the time he needed to strengthen his defenses, because he didn't take Hitler for his word. Stalin is one of the only people who actually really, truly gets Hitler as a liar that he is up until this point, and he knows that the invasion is coming. So essentially, the Nazi-Soviet Pact buys him the time he needs to start building his armed forces. And lastly, Stalin also fears war on two fronts. The Nazi-Soviet Pact makes sense insofar as Germany, don't forget, is in an alliance with Japan and Italy. On the eastern border of Russia is Japan. You'll recall from lessons back when we were talking about the League of Nations that Russia and Japan had actually been at war over islands that each believed that were theirs in the Pacific Ocean in 1905, and Russia had lost that war. Russia doesn't want to find itself fighting Nazi Germany and fighting Japan, its ally, on both sides of its country. So by shoring up an agreement of non-aggression, the fact that they won't attack each other with Nazi Germany, he not only buys himself time, he prevents himself from fighting against Japan and Germany simultaneously. Now, the consequences of the Nazi-Soviet Pact are pretty far-reaching. Okay, this deal really suits each other's short-term plans. The immediate result, of course, is to seal the fate of Poland. The minute the Nazi-Soviet Pact is announced, indeed, Poland was effectively done. Within a week and a half, Germany will be invading Poland. Okay, Hitler makes immediate plans in the wake of the Soviet Pact to invade Poland. There's absolutely nothing Britain and France could do other than to wage a general war against Germany to protect Poland. They could, of course, fight Germany, but they wouldn't be able to fight Germany in Poland. Additionally, Hitler had gotten more and more strong. At the same time as he was signing the Nazi-Soviet Pact, in fact, a little bit before, he signs an alliance with the Italians known as the Pact of Steel, which commits Germany and Italy to fighting alongside each other in the event that one country ends up at war. One of the interesting things about the Pact of Steel, in fact, is most alliances tend to be, if we are attacked, you will help us. The Pact of Steel commits Italy and Germany to fighting with each other, even if they do the attacking. So Germany, Italy, Japan have formed a very, very, very strong military alliance, and Hitler has a very strong diplomatic position as a consequence of both the Nazi-Soviet Pact and the Pact of Steel. The invasion of Poland, which takes place on the 1st of September 1939, really ushers in World War II. Britain and France declare war on Germany almost immediately. In fact, they gave Germany a very short time frame to withdraw the troops from the areas of Poland in which they invaded, and when Germany does not withdraw those troops, the British and the French declare war. The real reason that they declare war, apart from the invasion, is it was clear that Germany was making a bid for European domination. Okay? Going to war meant that the British and French would not accept Germany to be the single most powerful country in Europe, and by probably extension the world at this point. They could not allow Germany to do so. The existential threats to both Germany and Britain and France from a Germany that was this aggressive and this big were too much. And in 1939, public opinion had changed on Hitler's foreign policy, and not only that, Britain and France realized that war must happen now. Germany needs to be stopped before it gets out of control. And as a result, on the 1st of September 1939, the world is plunged into the Second World War in the span of in less than 21 years. A couple quick pictures of the invasion of Poland. What a lot of people don't realize is that it was a simultaneous invasion. The Russians invade Poland from the west, the Germans from the east, and of course from the north via East Prussia, and take Poland. Germany gets the real prizes in Poland. They get the capital city, Warsaw, and most of its valuable resources. The Russians expand their territory at the expense of the Poles in the east. This famous picture is Adolf Hitler in Poland inspecting German troops as they continue their march inwards. The one in the bottom right-hand corner, of course, is German troops removing the barrier at the border which allowed the German tanks to roll through into Poland, thus symbolizing the start of the Second World War. Quite an interesting cartoon, one that would come up if you had a source question on this, is probably this one. It talks about how Hitler, in the top left-hand corner, was a peacemaking person, just trying to work within the boundaries of international peace, but between 1938 and September 1939, he becomes a rampaging warmonger, which is very much in keeping with the sort of narrative that we've built after March of 1938. Hitler very much turns his foreign policy from let's incorporate things into the German Reich into let's dominate Europe. So, a couple last things. Why did Britain regard this as a sign Germany wanted to dominate Europe? Hitler had shown his ambitions, of course, and that these ambitions had gone beyond building a greater Germany with his actions in Czechoslovakia. Okay, this shows Britain that his real agenda is domination by force. Secondly, the invasion of Poland was regarded by Britain and France as a continuation of this process, even though Germany had legitimate grievances over areas of Poland, including the Danzig and the Polish corridor. What's more, Hitler was taken by surprise when they declared war. Actually, historians have found, say very much that Hitler finds himself in the wrong war. He never intended to be at war with Britain in particular, but not the least of France at this point. He actually believed that they would back down. Okay, he had seen how they had reacted to his previous violations of the peace settlement and thought it would be out of character for them to get involved over Poland. So in many ways, it's a gamble that goes wrong. Okay. Not only that, once he signed the Nazi-Soviet Pact, Hitler thought that he had basically outmaneuvered the British and the French, and he couldn't see how they could offer effective help. Therefore, he thought that they wouldn't. Okay. This made a declaration of war, which they eventually make on Germany, in his mind, quite pointless. And for many ways, it sort of was. In fact, the British and the French don't actually get involved in fighting the Germans in any concerted way until, let's say, the spring of 1940. And the era between September 1940 and, let's just say, April 1940 is oftentimes known as the phony war, because technically they're out of state of war, but they're barely fighting each other at all. Some argue that Britain and France were to blame for as their actions had allowed Hitler to draw these necessary conclusions. They'd done little more than protest over things like the Rhineland, remilitarization in general, okay, Anschluss, the Sudetenland. And this isn't the behavior of countries that would take a firm stand. So therefore, in many ways, it explains why Hitler wasn't deterred by that British-French guarantee to Poland. But also, in a sense, as a result of them, war broke out in Europe due to miscalculations on Hitler's part. Okay, there's no doubt a European war would have broken out sooner or later, and most historians agree to that. All his rearmament plans are geared towards war, not in the not too distant future. Most historians would say that Hitler was planning, and actually, by his own words, he promises Mussolini in an agreement in the Pact of Steel, actually, that he's not intending to go to war by 1940 until 1942. A.J.P. Taylor, who calls Hitler the great opportunist, cites that as really good evidence that Hitler saw an opportunity with the Nazi-Soviet Pact to invade Poland in September 1939. He was, in fact, actually planning for war in 1942. So, we see that eventually it would have happened, but in many ways, he made a calculated gamble as an opportunist to invade Poland, and that gamble backfires because he ends up in a global war. Britain and France, for their part, due to all of their mistakes, get engaged in World War II in September 1939 because they had run out of patience and tolerance. After the events of March, there was a general acceptance that war was right around the corner. This picture on the right is Neville Chamberlain shortly after announcing on BBC Radio that Britain was at a state of war and had entered war against Nazi Germany. And the look on his face, it really, I think, in many ways, grasps the magnitude of the situation that Britain found itself in 1939. Effectively at war with a Germany that was as unpredictable and as powerful as it had been in the past, and a war, of course, that we know will last for almost 6 years. That is the unit. You're going to have to really come to grips with a few things. Number one, why war was declared. Was war an accident? Was it Hitler being an opportunist? why did Britain and France change their policy of appeasement, and was appeasement really a good idea, all things considered? Minor considerations you have to make is the degree to which things like the Treaty of Versailles and the failure of the League of Nations influence war, but ultimately you need to come to grips with the fact that Britain and France had a policy meant to avoid war. That policy was multifaceted and happened for different reasons, but ultimately, due to Hitler's actions, patience had run out. And when patience had run out, if Hitler did one more thing, even if he had some legal entitlement to things like Danzig, the Polish corridor, there was nothing Britain and France could do to appease Hitler any further. He needed to be deterred, and as such, by September 1939, the world was at war.